Well, hi there. You're listening to Podcast is Broken, a podcast where we try to make Canadian news funner. My name is Brittlestar.
I'm Steve Boots.
My name is Lisa.
And I'm Rachel. Hi.
She's new here.
That was good.
I'm a regular.
No, that was good. That was cool. I liked it because it was very exciting, and it sounded like we were keeping there's a pause, a dramatic pause, and like he popped out from behind a screen or something.
That was all carefully planned to lead up to a big reveal.
Exactly.
I just really wanted to stand out, okay?
Yeah.
Mission
So
accomplished.
as you heard, we're very happy to have the amazing Rachel Gilmore here with us on Podcast is Broken. We're going to talk today about, it's the second part of our talk about the state of journalism. The first part we didn't record, so you'll have to just imagine what that was like. And
It's awesome.
just to pretend like we've never done this before. It's the first time. What? No.
I'm just hearing this now for the very first time.
Anyway,
What's journalism?
That's exactly. That's too far back, Rachel. That's too far back.
Okay.
Go forward a bit from there. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the state of journalism, and specifically, we're going to talk about the idea or the question that why does journalism seem to suck right now, or is it us as people who suck? What's the problem with journalism? So, as people know, there's distrust, there's mistrust, there's lots of negative trust things happening. And with journalism and media corporations, is there anything that we can do to fix that? We'll talk about all this kind of fun stuff relating to Canada and just in general as well. So, Rachel, can you fix journalism?
Yeah, for sure. Give me like 10 minutes, maybe?
Okay, awesome. That's great.
Nope.
You have a full hour, hon. You have a full hour.
Oh my God. Okay, so what else should I fix, huh?
What do you need? Tape, Elmer's glue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's we're pretty boned, honestly. Things are not headed in a great direction, but I am, if nothing else, somewhat of an optimist, believe it or not, still. So I do think that there are ways to make it happen, and there's a lot of really good people who are working towards that goal. I just wish there were more of them and less, assholes.
Who are the assholes?
Yeah, exactly. Are you
I'm
referring
curious.
to journalists, or are we talking about CEOs and stuff like that?
I mean, mostly the CEOs. Those are generally the problem. But obviously, there's also like bootlicking journalists that don't exactly contribute to the solution. And then there's, the grifters who are also eroding trust in journalism at the same time. There's just like all kinds of people tipping the scales in the worst direction possible, and a few really dedicated people trying to pull it back.
I just want to clarify, not Steve licking reporters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
A very distinct, different type of boots.
You
Very
somebody
important
was
to
going to
clarify.
ask the
Exactly.
question, so I just wanted to put it out there.
You know what? I'll watch my language. I don't want to if there's podcast HR or something,
I doubt Steve would have a problem with
man.
journalism if that was the issue.
Depends on the journalist, I suppose.
Exactly. So yeah,
David Menzies.
I don't know. The hat's not really my style.
I didn't say anything, and just saying that for the lawyers. And so tell me, what is the because is trying to find a really good way to say this. So what do you think is at the core of the decline of journalism, specifically in Canada, but just in general? Like, what's at the core of it? I mean, apart from bad actors and idiots, is there something that's happening that's the cause of this?
I mean, I would say capitalism. On late stage capitalism, things are just really extractive.
Right.
Yeah, people are treating journalism, and by people I mean the executives and the large telecom and other corporations that own most Canadian journalism right now, as something that they can extract profit from, as opposed to something that is a public good and something that exists for the public interest. And when you get away from that purpose, and your priorities shift away from treating it as a public good and something for the public interest into something that needs to make money, you start to run into some troubles. And, you know, we're seeing more and more layoffs, which means more and more journalists having to do more and more work with fewer resources, less pay, and I shouldn't say more and more journalists because it's less and less journalists themselves. Right. So it's a really hard time to be a journalist. It's not something anyone goes into for the money anymore. And it's all of those things contribute to an absolute. Can I say the F word on here? Do you guys?
Sure.
Do
We encourage it.
Okay, it contributes to a cluster. You don't want to tell me that. I have my driver's ed instructor told me I say fuck too much.
Rachel and I are going to get along real well.
Yeah. My mom's going to be so happy because she loves you guys. But
we love your
love
mom.
mom.
Hi, Rachel's
My
mom.
mom. Hi, Rachel's mom.
She's going to be so happy to hear that. But yeah, no, it's just basically I was going to say it's all clusterfuck because of the treatment of journalism as something to profit from as opposed to a public good.
Is that a new thing? Sorry, Pete.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Sorry.
go ahead. I want to
Sorry.
know the answer to that too.
No, but like, is this a new thing? Because I mean, we've heard about it more and more about these layoffs. Is this a testament to sort of just the world that we're in right now, where it's just business? Like you said, it used to be about, you know, the good of the story, but now it's just nobody's a philanthropist. Everybody's looking at the bottom line. So, what do you think? Is this just a new thing?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I mean, there's always been journalism that is like yellow journalism and stuff, trying to, you know, chase the clickbait and get money and, you know, treat it as more extractive. But I do think that this is part of a broader trend that we're seeing in society right now. I mean, you look at things like Boeing, where it used to be the gold standard of safety, and then they started treating it as something to extract as much profit from as possible. And now we're starting to see the cracks in the system as a result of cutting corners and trying to get as much profit out of it as possible. You're seeing it in the healthcare system. You constantly hear from people working in the healthcare system about how, you know, they're being insurance companies and hospital CEOs, hospital management are trying to treat it as something to extract as much profit from as possible. And it's just like the same theme in so many industries right now. So I think we have to try to not lose perspective as a society on what should be a public good and what is something that we should be sort of entitled to access as citizens. And I think that factual, good journalism that holds, you know, the most powerful people in our society to account is one of those essential things, and it's one of the first to go when societies start to struggle, because by its very nature, it prevents that, right? So no, it's a tough
on
thing.
that idea of journalism being a public good, I can't help but wonder, like, we talk about sort of the information environment these days, and a lot of it is driven by money, like you pointed at. If we're going to save journalism, the money's got to come from somewhere, right? People need to earn a living. And it's pretty clear that getting people to pay for journalism is not an easy task. Yeah. Getting people to accept public funding of journalism, not an easy task. So that's sort of my question to all three of you, but Rachel in particular, is where potentially could the money come from for something like this?
This is where I feel like I kind of have an answer. And
thank God we didn't. That's good.
You're welcome, guys.
Thank you.
So, I mean, okay, you guys bear with me. I'm going to try to keep this like super, you know, macro, like not get into the weeds here, but
get into the weeds.
But it's all about advertising. Okay. Like, media forever has made its like the bulk of its money off of advertising and selling ads. And what happened in the last like 2 decades is that the process of buying and selling ads became automated. So like something like 87% of the digital or of the ad industry right now, digital ad industry, is done through something called programmatic advertising as opposed to direct advertising. So like direct buys is, you know, you pick up the phone, you call the New York Times and you buy a spot in the newspaper. Whereas programmatic is this thing where you take your money, like your whole ad spend as a company, and you say, hey, Google, because it's always Google. Google's like got a huge monopoly on the ad industry. And you say, I want to reach women aged 35 to 45 who want to buy a car, right? So Google says we can get you those eyeballs because we stalk everybody digitally and have all this information about everyone on the internet. That's why your information is so valuable, because they use it to sell ads. So then they take that money and Google sends that through a pipeline that basically involves like auctions and middlemen, and it gets really complicated and it's super opaque and very hard to understand. And then the ad shows up on a website. And what's really difficult about this whole thing is that advertisers have no idea where their ads are ending up. And that is causing them to fund things that they don't want to fund. This is exactly the kind of thing I dig into with my work at Check My Ads. Like, they are showing up on sanctioned websites, on porn websites that they really don't want to be. I found an ad for the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints on a porn website. Do you think they intentionally bought that ad placement?
Like, would be a pretty savvy move.
Maybe they did buy them.
Jesus sees everything.
Yeah. I mean, you get the people where they're at, I suppose.
That's actually a really good point. You can straight to the center, you know?
That's their target market.
But so like to counteract this issue, instead of actually asking the advertising industry to impose some regulations and some oversight so that brands know where their ads are ending up, they're having to do these like stopgap measures to protect their brand. And there's a whole industry around this called the brand safety industry, which sells products that say, hey, we're going to scan a website to make sure that your ad isn't showing up next to something like porn or something that isn't brand safe. But the problem there is those companies have started considering stuff brand unsafe that just makes people have big feelings or feel bad. And they're trying to convince companies, oh, you don't want to advertise next to something that makes someone feel sad, right? But that's actually not like rooted in any real facts. There's no reason. Like, people don't actually like your product less if it shows up next to something that makes them feel bad, if that thing that makes them feel bad is an article from a trusted news organization. So like, instead of actually advertising in those spaces and giving money where it should be going, which is to the news, they're depriving themselves and depriving those news organizations of the income by using brand safety tools that defund any publication that mentions the word Black Lives Matter or racism or abortion or war or bomb or COVID. And so like newspapers suffer hugely, right? And advertising is like a $600 or $700 billion industry globally. It's bigger than ever. So newspapers should be doing better than ever. But instead, they're failing because there's this huge problem with no oversight. All of that money is being siphoned away by grifters and bad actors that know how to work that opaque system. And in order to try to prevent that from happening, brands are buying into this like product, this industry that actually just defunds legit journalism. It's a clusterfuck, but you know, that's what I'm working on at Check My Ads. So you guys should all check us out. And you know, it's a really big issue, and it's where a lot of the solutions could lie, I think.
So out of curiosity, go ahead, Lisa.
No, you go. I went last time.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry, a Canadian standoff has emerged.
I've been working with Americans lately, and like the company I work with is American, and I have to say it's refreshing hearing all the sorries and the positive.
Well, I was just wondering, like, with all of this focus on advertising, is that I'm just wondering if that's necessarily the best option, because no matter how advertising is paired with media content like that, it's going to be either in some way connected to it, or it's in some way potentially going to editorially influence that media, even if it's something as simple as what they decide to cover. So I wonder if, like, do you think that ads are, you know, central to the solution, or do you think there's an element of public funding, or do you think that there's an element of, I don't know, crowdfunding, something? Because being entirely beholden to advertisers is such a risky position for journalists to be in. And so I'm wondering if you've got any sort of ideas for how journalists could insulate themselves from that.
Well, I mean, I do think there's some baked in insulation in the fact that there's like so many companies out there and so much money in the advertising world that the odds of like any one advertiser really having such a stronghold over a news outlet that they can influence coverage would be like incredibly unlikely, especially if it continues to be served programmatically, where it is still them buying eyeballs. It just, you know, happens with some oversight so that they can say, oh, actually, we don't want to have our ads on Breitbart and like make that happen. But that said, I do think that, I mean, advertising is where the most money is right now. Like, that can be funneled back into journalism. Like, the average person, I don't know about you guys, but I don't have like the extra couple hundred a year to subscribe to like multiple news outlets, because they'll run you between like $200 and $400 a year for like a single news publication.
Yeah.
Which, like, if you can afford it, yeah, great, pay it. But like, that's not really what's going to save journalism. Public funding is definitely an option. It gets so politicized though, which is like really tough. And it's so funny because like the National Post gets so many of this, like, the bailout fund people talk about. And all it does is publish like unhinged op-eds and like attack Trudeau and like, just make out with Polyev. So it's just, I don't know. I don't really understand if they're not getting a great ROI, the Liberal government, if that's like, what they were intending with that money. But people aren't logical about these things. And so if they vote out a government because they perceive it as buying the press, and they also like, I mean, first of all, if that's the outcome, then a government isn't going to want to invest that way because it's so unpopular that it could risk their political, life. So it could risk their government. And also those things when they're characterized in the wrong hands and characterized wrongly by these individuals that, like the fake news guys, that ends up eroding trust in media. So it's a really tough one. Like, I don't know what the best answer there is, which is why I keep coming back to the advertising one, because there's so much money there. It's so spread out that I don't think anyone would be beholden to a certain interest. We just need to break up the monopolies in advertising, that if anything, you're beholden to Google here, which is a big problem.
Can I be the optimist here? I'm going to be an optimist for a little bit.
Yeah,
it feels weird, but I'll be an optimist.
And we'll sit back. Go ahead.
Okay. Just let Grandpa get his words out. Because I am the guy who subscribes to the Globe and Mail newspaper to be thrown on my lawn every morning, and it's just I'm doing that. I'm just doing that. Don't you just say "aw"?
Yeah, it's just like that's so cute. Do you also like
cute?
carry
How
around
quaint!
sticky? Do you have little sticky toffees in your pocket?
Do you
too?
put your
Like,
adorable
so
little
cute.
half glasses on the end of your nose to read it?
Would you like a word?
Oh my god!
No, you strike me as a licorice all sorts sort of man.
I am a licorice also term man. Delicious, fantastic.
That's an odd way.
The dark ones with the white center.
Focus.
I shouldn't do that.
Okay.
Sorry. Focus. Sorry. Anyway, I'll be an optimist. So there was a story in the Toronto Star, which I've never told you about before, by Kevin Newman, who was talking about the decline of news media, and specifically talking about Bell Media and them gutting the place basically, and then having nothing left to sell, as it were. Like they're chewing away so much stuff and hacking away so many positions. They're gonna have nothing left to sell. He made a reference to W5, and I saw Lisa LaFlamme posted about W5 as well today, because tonight is last night was the last episode, maybe, I think. And saying that, this is something that was born of let's create good stories that are entertaining, that are factual, that are informative, and all that kind of stuff. And that's just not in vogue, basically. It's not sort of de rigueur anymore. You just got to cut to the chase and chase clicks. Again, like Kevin Newman said, are they not just doing away with so much of their service that they're going to have nothing left to sell? And I'll tell you another little, as a little analogy or a side story, which I've never told you as well, is back in '88 when the train service got cut from Stratford to Toronto, there used to be like 4 to 6 trains a day running to Toronto from Stratford, and after the cuts, because they weren't making enough money, they said, let's run less trains and make it cost more. And then nobody could rely on the train. And then it's like, well, we can't make it. This business is crap. This isn't working at all. It seems like it's run by idiots who are only going to find out eventually, or someone's going to come along as a competitor and say, I think the value is in creating good journalism. I think there's going to be a value in that, and that me as a consumer can actually seek out the journalism where I think, like that's the reason I follow the three of you, is it's like I know I can go to the three of you and at least get a better understanding of what's happening, and I trust what you're saying. Is that a possibility that we can get into that situation? Like, I can see myself going, you know what? I'm going to pay, like I pay for Apple News. I pay for that because I want to have some options, to sort of see and some actual information as opposed to reading something on Facebook and getting freaked out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, okay, a lot of people don't read more than like 250 words of any article. So that dampens slightly my expectation that many people would like be all over a ton of investigations and stuff. Although if you work really hard and do a really good investigation, sometimes they read like 500 words. So, you can make it happen. But no, like I do think that they are creating, in doing these cuts, they're absolutely creating a deficit. They're creating a gap in the margin because people do want to be informed. But the difficulty there is that unlike a train service where you very much know that you can get, like, you're not getting from point A to point B unless you have that service. Journalism, you can feel like you're getting from point A to point B, but you're actually riding something completely toxic. So
Toxic
what's risky
train.
Here?
Yeah,
exactly. Ooh, scary. Like
good
drops of
alliteration.
Jupiter, but like drops of hellfire. Sorry, that's way too niche, but yeah. So the problem is that what we're already seeing is that a bunch of people are filling that void, but it's like the Daily Wire and like, the Western Standard, the Post Millennial, the True North, the, Rebel News. It's all these guys that claim to be telling the truth and they fundraise like crazy, especially Rebel News. So like, because they are making money off of telling people, we're telling you what no one else is going to tell you, which is a very compelling thing. But they, the problem with a lot of the folks filling the void, without getting too specific because some of them are highly litigious, is that they don't necessarily do so in a factual way. And what we need is good journalists to adapt and fill this void and meet audiences where they are in the ways that they want to consume information in this day and age. Like I've never said this before, of course, but there used to be the town crier, and then there was newspapers, and then there was radio, and then there was TV. Like, news has had to adapt before. Media has had to adapt before. And right now, I think we are experiencing another one of those shifts in tandem with this late stage capitalism that's making everything so much harder. And what we need to see, I think, our news organizations do is bring their journalism to where people are. And the problem is right now, the people who are really effectively filling those voids and figuring out not just the medium through which people want to consume information, but the style, the, affect, the delivery of that information, aside from people like you guys, you guys are killing it. But there's people who are doing it who are the Daily Wires, who are like these really toxic, people who aren't beholden to any sort of facts or the truth. So people might feel like they're being informed, but they're actually being misinformed.
So this is what I was going to ask you about that, because I feel like there's like almost like an old school journalism and a new school. And the old school, I feel, hasn't kept up with whatever the hell it is that we're seeing, the sensationalized stories, the Sasquatch stories that are coming out about things like COVID and, things that maybe aren't necessarily truthful or ethical. But that, it begs the question of, and we've never discussed this before, but like, is it the chicken or the egg? Are the consumers of that sensationalized groups of people, are the stories creating that, or are the readers begging the stories? Because, I mean, we hear about, defund the CBC and that, and, it's biased. Biased is the big word. But I mean, I can read a news article and see where the person writing the article has actually done some research, looked into things, is posing the question, is bringing the information. I read some other things and I think, where the hell did they come up with this? And there's no way to reference where they got that. So what are your thoughts on that, the old versus new?
Well, I mean, first of all, what you just described is media literacy, and we need so much more of that. We need people to, because like that's the thing I noticed. If I read like, you know, some articles or some outlets that shall not be named, I will read their post and they'll say something as if it's fact, but they will provide no evidentiary basis for that you can actually then look up yourself to see if they're interpreting that correctly. So like, you should always do that, whether you're reading the Globe and Mail or the Western Standard. Like, always interrogate what you're reading.
Sure.
And then you know that what you're reading is true, and you actually have more in-depth understanding of it as well. But you know, when you mention the chicken or the egg, I think it's a little bit of both, because a lot of people out there want to hear that they're right, and a lot of people had their brains completely cooked. Like their friggin' fried eggs during COVID when they were at home and spending a lot of time on social media and interacting and seeing posts from these grifters who had a lot to gain monetarily from scaring the shit out of people. And, you know, it's hard to admit that you're wrong about something. It's really hard. It's the same thing you see with like pyramid schemes and things like that. You know, people end up having huge fights with their relatives and their pride becomes staked on these things. And it's really hard to see. But what ends up happening is that it becomes very hard for someone to admit that they're wrong. So of course they're going to actively seek out sources that don't make them feel that uncomfy feeling of, oh my God, what if I've been wrong this whole time? And the fact that my wife divorced me over this and my kids don't talk to me anymore is, you know, my fault. That's a tough pill to swallow, right?
Trudeau's fault. It's always Trudeau's fault.
Yeah.
Who else but Trudeau?
So but I mean, my God, is it not so much easier to blame Trudeau than late stage capitalism? Trudeau's just one guy. Late stage capitalism is like a whole system, right?
It's a whole concept, exactly.
But that,
yeah, exactly.
I think that brings up something important, though. People are very eager to interact with content that confirms their assumptions.
Sure.
And so how do we get people to interact with and consume content that challenges them, that makes them ask uncomfortable questions? Because people flee from uncomfortable questions very quickly. Like if you ask somebody who's like a hardline party supporter of any party a pointed question about a failing of their party's policy, in a lot of cases, they just don't even want to look at it. They're just like, no, we're not having this discussion, right? So how do you get people to interact with content that maybe challenges their assumptions or expectations?
I feel like you have to, I mean, it's hard. And I can't say that I've necessarily, I don't know that I've ever succeeded in it. But one thing that I have found, I'll tell you guys a little like anecdote that might help. Like of the time that during the convoy, I was walking through the streets reporting on it. And I was walking on Wellington Street when there was like a lineup of cops, you know, facing the protesters. It was all very dramatic and, you know, nuts. And there was this guy who was yelling and waving his hand in front of the Radio Canada camera, yelling, fake, fake, fake. And he was just blocking their ability to report. And I mean, I kept finding myself feeling frustrated because I'm like, you guys, you're so mad that you're not having this reported on to your liking, but you're also making it very hard to report at all on what's going on, like just literally logistically. But this guy just wouldn't stop and he was so angry. And I just said to him, I was like, hey, you want to talk to someone? You want someone to hear you? I'm a journalist. Come talk to me. I'll talk to you. Like, talk to me. Don't like block them. And so he walks over and I get my camera out and he's like, well, I don't want to talk to you because you're just going to like twist everything I say. And I was like, you know, well, can we try? Let's have a conversation. And what I ended up doing was I ended up talking to him, and over the course of the conversation, he kind of like took a breath and I said to him, I'm like, you know that we're human beings, right? Like we're doing our best and we do this job. We're not making a ton of money. We're doing this job because we want you to like have the facts and to understand what's going on. We're not trying to hurt you here. We're making like no money. We're just doing our best. And like, we don't always get it right, but we're trying. And I think that kind of seeing me as a human being helped him to then have a conversation with me as a human being. And he told me about how, you know, he had, you know, claimed to have had, he had some stomach issues and it happened after he was vaccinated. And he made a link there that regardless of whether that was the real cause was very real to him. And he was terrified.
Sure.
So, you know, we had this real conversation, human to human. And by the end of it, we shook each other's hands and like, you know, I think I hopefully planted a seed in his head that the media isn't this evil boogeyman necessarily that, you know, you can't even begin to listen to. And maybe he went home and actually read something that challenged his opinions. And I don't know, I'm probably getting a little too wishful there. But I do think if you lead with empathy and you lead with understanding that people are human, you can maybe get somewhere. But I also understand why some people might not feel comfortable doing that, why it takes a lot of privilege to be able to even get into a space where someone like that will listen to you. And, you know, it's not something that's an open door for everyone.
I think that shows the importance of journalism as well, right? Because exactly similar to what you had done. I remember during the crackdown to the convoy, another alliterative term that I just made up right now. And I actually did just make that up right now. It wasn't the reference. It doesn't matter. Anyway.
Right off the dome.
Right off the dome. But the importance of journalism, exactly, a similar situation to you talking to that gent in Ottawa. I remember watching Evan Solomon being harassed live on TV and them saying, you're fake, you're going to twist our words. And he said, I remember him saying, because he's like 8'2", right? I remember sort of like bending down and going, this is live. This is live to the nation right now. There's no twisting. Everything you say is going out to the country right now. So you can say whatever you want. And of course, that kind of breaks down the illusion, kind of shatters it, pulls the curtain back a little bit. And I think people, they see it's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. But there's a lot of saving face and all that kind of stuff. My question is, media literacy is so important. An extension of that in general being, I feel that critical thinking has gone to hell. And I think that judging character has gone to hell. And I think to myself, like, critical thinking is responsible for all of that, of course. But it's like, why do we have people who are trusting Trump? Why do we have people who are buying into these silly stories and nonsense stories? And more than just entertainment, they're believing it as news. It's like So I Married an Axe Murderer, the movie that came out before you were born, Rachel, where the main Mike Myers character's mom refers to the Weekly World News, the stories of Bat Boy and stuff, as the paper. I'm reading the paper. That's it. That was her paper. That was kind of the joke, though. It's like this is just news to her. It's not entertainment. Do we feel like that? Is journalism just another casualty in this? Is that what's happening for some reason? That was a real good question, wasn't it? It's knocked everyone silent.
Yeah,
The deep sigh.
You can all answer.
I think that in a day and age when anybody can pick up their phone or a camera and become a journalist, because that's the world that we're in with social media, right? And we saw that at the convoy. I don't want to talk about the convoy, but the convoy. Because even though things were live, they still denied them happening, right? Because that's not what they want to see. Are people going to challenge themselves to go outside of what is, confirming their bias when that almost comforts them in this day and age? I did a video the other day about the carbon tax rebate, and everyone's like, I never got it, blah, blah, blah. And I literally showed them on the Canada.ca website, like, who's getting what and how, and they still deny it. So I don't know how you get people to open their minds again. I feel like the minds of the people are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I don't know how you do it.
Well, I think a big problem too is that people often aren't engaging with a desire to learn anything. Like they're commenting on your stuff with no openness to the idea that they could be wrong. And that's a big problem. And it's a problem that's compounded by the fact that there are so many people out there. And you made such a good point about the era that we're in, where anyone can pick up a camera. Like, the bar to entry to create media content is so much lower now, which can be a really great thing, but can also be a really, really terrible thing in the wrong hands. And the thing is, between algorithms that amplify rage bait and things that make people feel big feelings, and, the monetary reward for doing that, and the tendency from people to then who, I mean, if you see something that terrifies you, you're going to Google it and be like, it's just, oh my God, what am I seeing? And then you might read more stuff that confirms it or stuff that fact checks it, depending on your media literacy level. But there's so many people out there who are willing to write those stories right now that terrify people, that are disproportionate. And, you know, we definitely never talked about this before. Sorry, got to stop referencing our failed recording. But, but you know, something that I think about a lot is not the issue of, and there's an issue of proportionality in reporting that's really key to actually accurately reporting an issue. It's not just about getting all the facts right in a story. It's also about, you know, if you're reporting on, say, vaccine injuries, which like some people do have negative reactions to a vaccine. But if you are reporting on that in a way that makes it seem, you know, disproportionate, or that it's going to happen to, like, you know, maybe you don't know a single person who it's happened to, but you read a new article every day about someone it's happening to, and you're probably going to feel like it's going to happen to you. And, you know, I one time was at a bar and ended up talking to a person who works for one of these outlets for hours because I wanted to know why they were the way that they were and why they report the way that they report. And they said that they felt as though they were doing a service for people who don't feel heard by mainstream media. And I do think that there is absolutely, like, there are failings in mainstream media, and we've seen that, you know, in spades, especially in the last few months. But, like, you know, the grievances that he was responding to were not, in my mind, those fair failings. What he was doing and what his outlet does was disproportionately report on issues and scare people, because we're not reporting on the risks of birth control. And, you know, if every single day I wrote an article on women having side effects from birth control and like the strokes and all the other health issues, not to be alarmist about it now, but, you know, just to make the point that that would probably scare people if we plucked those people out from everywhere around the world and made it sound like it was happening every 2 seconds, which is what these outlets do with COVID stuff and with vaccine injuries and with these other issues. You have a responsibility to report something in a proportionate way. Otherwise, you're going to scare people and you're going to make people think that something is happening more than it actually is. But scaring people and making people have big feelings leads to more clicks, leads to people's beliefs feeling reinforced and them feeling heard, which shouldn't be, unfortunately, the most important thing in every context. Telling people the truth and giving them the facts to make their own decisions should be the most important thing.
Okay, if I can just jump in for a second, I think what's dawned on me now is that, is it possible, and you can just tell me I'm wrong, all three of you can tell me I'm wrong, is it possible that we become hypercritical because it's so easy to create content, so easy to create news on our phones and capture events and twist things and produce things, and we become hypercritical so that we trust nothing now, and that pushes us to confirmation bias because at least someone say the same thing I'm thinking. That's good. Okay, thank God. Is that what's happened? Is it not a case of us becoming less critical, but we're becoming even like way too critical about things?
I think that if we didn't have extreme journalism on either side, because they both have their points, then the central journalism could speak to those things that vaccines work, but there's also a risk here. And you could have that conversation and actually inform people. But the way that things are happening now is that someone will take a snippet of a statement and run with it, that anybody that, you know, has a vaccine is going to die within 2 years. And I think that's where we're at, is that there is no gathering of information and showing all sides. It's almost like you have to pick a lane and stick in that lane with whatever you're putting forward. At least that's what I see with those that shall not be named.
So, Rachel, I think what I'm wondering, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is how much do you think this is based on outlets versus individuals? Like, do you think that people trust a given outlet, or do you think that they're looking to individual journalists who they trust?
You know, it's interesting because I think that there have been some studies on how people consume their news, and the thing that they've found is that a lot of people, especially younger people, like to get their news from personalities, from people who they have what they feel is almost a personal relationship with. So people like you guys who like are on these platforms talking to them like you're on FaceTime and explaining an issue, and you know, they can go to the comments and they know that you're the one running that account who they would be interacting with in the comments. And, you know, they have this kind of personal experience and they know who you are, they know where you're coming from, and then they know how to absorb the information through the lens of who you are. But I mean, I do think that when it comes to the mainstream organizations, most people view those as a monolith, when there's definitely different journalists who bring different perspectives and different angles and different ways of reporting to the table. But I think that there's certainly, I mean, there's kind of like two different ways I can answer that question, because it's like, what is actually happening versus like, what are the positives and negatives of what's happening? But I mean, I think that there is certainly a tendency now to want to get your news from personalities, which can be for better or for worse. I think that news outlets could take that and lean into it, and they could foster that kind of community through having a few journalists who have rigorous fact checking behind their reporting, and they have the institutional knowledge, the institution of that media outlet backing how they report to the public. But you're not seeing a lot of outlets kind of take that opportunity, and then that's where you have independent people filling the gaps, for better in you guys' cases and for worse in some other cases. Sorry, I hope it kind of answered what you were asking. But
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, you could also say that, I mean, mainstream media, for lack of a better term, because I think we're all kind of mainstream media now. I mean, it's hard to think whatever the mainstream is. I mean, the mainstream media in the traditional sense of network television and stuff, I mean, they have that kind of idea where they used to have, you know, Lloyd Robertson or Peter Mansbridge or Lisa LaFlamme or something, or you know, even Omar Sachedina. They just try to rebrand as like a trustworthy face, and he's being invited into your home and stuff. And it feels like, and even like in newspapers as well, you'd have various columnists and stuff. You'd be like, I like this columnist, and your Andrew Coynes and all that kind of stuff, where people trust them, but then it feels like a lot of them are getting pushed out because of in search of the clicks, exactly as you said, in search for advertising dollars, and it's like they won't back them. So it doesn't matter if mainstream network, traditional media, whatever you want to call it, it has those personalities that you trust, because they're not making enough money to support a bunch of people anymore. I guess is that what's happening?
I would also, I wonder if there's an incentive for news organizations not to create those personalities, because once you have a name that can't just be laid off and replaced with another nameless person, you can ask for more money. And a lot of these like people are getting laid off because they're too expensive, according to these executives who are making buttloads of money, like crazy amounts. And I have no fucking idea what they contribute to the actual news gathering or journalistic process. To me, that's where the bloat is, you know? But I almost feel like they're disincentivized from fostering those kind of personality connections that are, by their very nature, help enhance trust with the public. And that's sad, because it's like they're putting their desire not to have to pay some people more over the survival of their organization and the kinds of investments that could be in their best interest. Like maybe they can afford one Omar, but if they could afford, you know, 7 Omar Sachedinas, that would probably go a long way to building public trust. But instead, they're laying off every single one. So
yeah, and it's business, right? Yeah. It's totally business, because it's the same as in social media. Like the platforms, the algorithm is great at giving users what they're looking for and scratching their itch. But it doesn't as a content creator. Like I think all of us know on TikTok, for example, it doesn't matter how many followers you have, because something will hit, something won't hit, something will hit, something won't hit.
Yeah.
And it just depends on whatever else is out there during the day, which is great for the user again, in a way. But I think no big business wants to create a star system, because then they're beholden to it, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and then you have more freedom. You can say what you actually think online, or push back on editorial decisions, and expect your news organization to be better and defend your colleagues, and God forbid, maybe speak out against death threats. And, you know, it just starts getting into this territory that's real uncomfy for the executives. So
I think it's an interesting thing, because I never really thought of it this way, that journalists, reporters, our frontline workers. I think we sometimes forget that they are the ones out there, right? So they're the ones performing the work, getting the information, delivering it to people. And they're akin to a healthcare frontline worker or a teacher, or, you know what I mean? Like, that's the front that everybody sees. I think sometimes you think, oh, like, you know, Peter Mansbridge up in, you know, his tower and things like that. Or we don't think of them as people. Like you were saying when you were talking to the convoy dude, you're just a person getting information. You just have the ability to put it out for other people to see. And I think maybe we need to have a better understanding that journalists are us. You know what I mean? Like, that we're the same. We all want the information. But you're also, as a frontline worker, a threat to the money that's lining the pockets, which is, it's really quite sad.
Well, and I also think that another issue with acknowledging they are us is that actually a really compelling case for more diversity and more, you know, making sure that you have a variety of people from a variety of backgrounds and lived experiences in your newsrooms, because if we are all individuals doing our best, but subject to our own failings as individuals in the lenses through which we see the world, then we should also have people who have different lived experiences and different lenses through which they experience that world. Otherwise, news organizations aren't actually representing all of the us. But the problem that we see a lot is that, like, you know, there's all kinds of issues within news organizations where they will hire people from diverse backgrounds, but then they won't actually listen to them when they want to change the status quo from what the old, like, the pale male, you know, upper echelons of the organization want, how they want things to work. Yeah, the brittle stars that just, you know,
right.
Just pointing at themselves.
I believe his official title is The Man.
Yes,
The Man.
Yeah, exactly.
The Man. Yeah, The Man. That's me.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's like there's all kinds of things. We just can't let things get too good, because then it'll challenge the status quo. And if we actually, like, interrogate these hard questions and look at the areas where I think a lot of the answers lie, they lie in areas that are inherently, like, less capitalist and less in line with the current power structures that benefit the brittle stars with their Werthers and their Globe and Mail.
Calm down. Everyone dial it back a bit. It was a joke.
Sorry,
it was a
licorice
joke
all
setup.
sorts, right?
It's licorice all sorts, first of all. Exactly.
it's going to be the Brittle Star show next week. Oh,
Exactly.
So I wonder about the flip side of this, though. Like, we talk about sort of the past of journalism with sort of those monolithic figures, your Mansbridges, your Cronkites, your sort of the figures surrounded by a cloud of cigarette smoke behind them in our memories. And so I don't think there's a lot of people who would argue that they didn't do good journalism in their time, but I do think there's something to be said for the number of available perspectives in those periods of time were limited. And these days, like, I cover news from a pretty leftist point of view. You aren't seeing that on TV. You wouldn't have seen that on TV in the 70s. Holy smokes. So I'm wondering if you feel like, is this a net good that there's a much larger diversity of opinions sitting out there rather than just that sort of central narrative?
I do have, this is actually the area where I do have, like, a lot of optimism, and where I almost feel like the crashing and burning that we're seeing of the mainstream media, it's the upside of it. Because, you know, assuming there is a phoenix that rises from the ashes, I hope it's, you know, this like diversity of reporting perspectives and, you know, people, like, I mean, when I say diversity of reporting perspectives, that's all within the framework of, like, having a dedication to facts and, like, you know, basing your, you know, you can interpret those facts in ways that are then lead to them being presented from a more leftist perspective or a more conservative one or whatever. But, like, it still needs to actually have the factual basis and, like, allow people to then take those facts and, like, interpret them for themselves. But, like, I do feel as though in some ways these institutions deserve to die. Like, I don't want to, after I got laid off a year ago, I did not apply for a single mainstream journalism job. I didn't apply for one. Like, I got messages from people telling me about, like, big name jobs to apply for, but I didn't want to, because I know I didn't want to go back into a newsroom where I felt like, you know, the editorial priorities weren't in line with the important, you know, like, I mean, I'm not trying to just, like, shit on all, there's a lot of colleagues who are doing amazing work
Sure.
But I really care about, like, for example, the rise of far-right extremism and the attacks on the LGBTQ communities and things like that. And you want to talk about proportion of coverage, those are issues that are being undercovered, and in my opinion. And I didn't want to go back to a newsroom where I had to, like, beg and plead for a week straight to try to get a story out the door that would then get tons of clicks about the issue of far-right extremism. So I don't know. I think that, like, there's a lot of failings in these institutions. They're failing a lot of different perspectives. They're failing a lot of different communities in their reporting, and their unwillingness to adapt, and the pale males in the upper rungs are actually really hurting our society and our democracy and our access to information. So I'm optimistic that if these do burn, hopefully what rises from the ashes is something better. And it's not just more of, the Ezra Levants of the world, just a different iteration of pale male that has a lot more anger.
So most of us weren't around, when we went from town crier to printing press, etc. But there would have
Why
been
are you looking at me? Why are you looking at me?
No, he got his yelled at him in the town square. You know this.
Video killed the radio star. That's what I heard.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but there would have been an uncomfortable process, right, in transitioning from one thing to another. So do you think that we're just in a really uncomfortable time that, based on the fact that we have social media, et cetera, is just more visible to people? And is there a chance, because you said you have colleagues that do wonderful work, but they're doing the work within the parameters that are afforded to them, right? Yeah. And so do you think this is just another one of those historical moments that we just have to kind of get through, and hopefully something better comes up? That's a loaded question, I know.
No. It's, it ties into, I don't know if you guys have watched Jon Stewart's comeback, but he said something about how democracy isn't something you have, it's something you do. Or he said something along those lines. And, like, I lived in Tunisia for 2.5 months when their democracy, there was a referendum upcoming that was potentially really going to screw up their democracy, depending on whose perspective you believed on what it could do. And there was all of this, like, authoritarian stuff kind of slowly happening. And they had only been a democracy for 10 years at the time. And, I remember noticing how fragile democracy really is. Like, not to get too dramatic about it all, but, like, I remember I went to see Jurassic Park with my Tunisian friends in, like, the movie theater, or, like, we went shopping in the Medina downtown, and you'd read the news and see, oh yeah, the president just fired 50 judges who he disagrees with politically. And then you carry on with your day and finish the movie and get your popcorn and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's just, like, it's very easy to stick your head in the sand and ignore really big red flags happening around you. And in the same way that, burying your head in the sand can be comfortable until it's not. And that's why you also have to listen to the most vulnerable members of your community, because they feel it before you do. So, like, they will sound the alarm, as we are hearing from trans folks in our communities. We're seeing the most vulnerable under attack right now. These are the moments that we have to actively nurture the survival of our democracy. And which, every day is those, it brings a different iteration of that. But so the point I'm trying to make is that when you talk about living through an uncomfortable moment of transition, it's not just one we have to live through, it's one we have to be really conscious and active as we endure it. So we need to be very intentional about, who do we want, what version of journalism is going to rise out of this? Do we want it to be in the hands of tech giants? Do we want it to be in the hands of, live streamers, for better or worse? Do we want it to be in the hands of the mainstream in a different capacity? And these are, I think that as opposed to other fundamental changes in the way that information is conveyed, like we saw with, like, print to TV, radio, like all of those things, this is a bigger one, because it's the barrier to entry has dropped hugely in a way that it never has before. So I think we have to be really vigilant with how we navigate this transition. And I don't know what that vigilance should look like. And I think there's a lot of really compelling answers that people might have to that probably have a lot bigger brains than me. So
in the wake of this huge democratization of media and sort of everybody having access to a phone and being able to create their own stuff, And at the same time, there's this big reshuffling and realignment happening within the media. Do you think that there's a value to sort of the maintenance of the institutions within Canadian media, your CTVs, your Globals, your Star, whatever it may be? Do you think that those institutions still have a place in this new sort of media environment, or do you think that that very structure is what needs to be disrupted?
I don't know. I think that there's pros and cons. Like the structure itself has things that it offers that, you know, having worked in both now, that I can tell you, like, there's things I miss from working in a newsroom that is the size of CTV or Global, which is like, you know, but I mean, these are also things that are being eroded as they're making more and more cuts and asking people to do more work with less. But
plus,
you know,
it's impossible to put together a lunch order.
Oh my God, so true. But I mean, like, and who pays for the lunch now? Because you're all making like no money. But no, like it's, you have layers of accountability in these newsrooms, like fact checkers and people behind the scenes who have institutional knowledge, who can point you to different sources and help you kind of have a level of access that you might not get when you're just on your own. But we're also seeing all of that eroded because the people with the institutional knowledge who are, you know, well sourced and have been in the industry for forever are getting laid off because they're too expensive. We're having, you know, I worry about corners being cut with edits because there's too few editors doing too much work, and you know that you'll see more corrections happen because of that. And you know, those are the kinds of ways that those cracks will show. So, but you know, as a model, having that kind of backbone and that like big team all working together has a lot of positives that, you know, working independently you miss out on. But with this lower, like with the democratization that you, as you described it, you do get more perspectives and you get more people doing the work, and you know, but then you also, there is a lack of democratization when you consider the mediums through which we're conveying this. Like, you know, the TikTok could be banned, and also has its own moderation policies that don't always make a ton of sense and aren't always consistent. We just saw Instagram, Meta, you know, block all political content without giving anyone a heads up. They just quietly limited it. So check your settings, folks, because your political content might be limited for you. So, you know, there's even questions about whether it's truly democratized when you put it in the context of the tech giants. But I think there's just pros and cons to every different model. And I think that the most important thing throughout it is just to not lose sight of what journalism is for, who journalism is for, and why it's an important institution, like why we do it. It shouldn't be about clicks. It shouldn't be about making money. It should be, although hopefully you can make a living wage, which I didn't always at some of these newsrooms. It should be about helping people at the end of the day. Like that's the whole reason I went into it, is because I want to help people. And I think that informing them and telling their stories is a really great way of doing that. So as long as we don't lose sight of that, I think that you can't go wrong. But the problem is that a lot of people have lost sight of that. And I don't know how the people who haven't lost sight of that win.
Well, that sort of torpedo my next question, because I was going to say, I think we can all agree that journalism is super important, and it's how like democracy depends upon it, and just general living depends on it as well, in a society. I was going to ask you, in addition to preparing for the big shift that's happening in news creation and publication and broadcasting, what's something that, you know, what's something that schmucks like us can do like right away to help meet news and journalism? Like, should we start subscribing to more news papers? Should we start thinking out particular people like yourself, like journalists, and say, don't make fun of my newspaper subscription. Don't.
Easy there, Rockefeller.
Don't.
I
what I'm trying to say is,
made so many jokes about your subscription because people really should subscribe.
So I subscribe to the Globe and Mail too, but digitally. Yeah. Come on, man.
Well, listen, Shannon has the digital subscription. I have the paper subscription because I'm a classic man. No, I don't know. It's
well, my mom still has the paper.
I used to subscribe in paper, but it just went straight from the front step to the recycling bin.
Only some days that happens, and that's some days about 40 to 60% of the week it happens. But other than that, Like the Saturday paper is garbage. But apart from that, it's great. But is there anything that, that regular schmucks can do to sort of like help journalism? I guess it's a really broad question, but...
Yeah, it's a good question. It's just one that I wish I had a really easy answer for. I mean, support journalism that you believe in. Like, if you come across an outlet, whether it's a big one or a little one, and you use your media literacy skills and have found that they do really good work, and, you can subscribe to them. Like, there's new shops like 404 Media and The Breach and, all of these new publications that are coming out that are kind of reporter run and led. And they're doing really fantastic work. So like, I would say seek those out, support them. And just public pressure is so effective, which can be for better or for worse. Like, I think that a lot of newsroom executives don't understand social media and like see all of the people saying like, you're biased in the comments on every article that criticizes generally anything right wing. And they think, oh God, we're being biased. And they try to like cater to those people. And that's like really concerning that, I think a lot of these guys don't understand fundamentally how that can be gamed. But you can also use that to your advantage to pressure these guys into paying their staff adequate wages and to, you need to get organized. Like, people need to organize and demand better from these bosses that are extracting profit from every industry that we care about. We have to just not take it lying down that there are people who are getting rich as hell as they destroy everything we care about and hurt the people that we love. Like, that's maybe a tall order, but like, talk to your friends and talk about like the issues that are going on with these extractive approaches to different industries and start speaking out about them. Like, people are going to boycott Loblaws. Why don't we boycott, news outlets that fuck over their reporters until they hire them back and, show solidarity. Show solidarity. So, yeah.
Love it. Love it.
I like it. Well, it was a lovely ending note there. And of course, speaking of ending notes, as is tradition on Podcast is Broken, we improvise our theme song as an outro. We use found instruments. And what are you using there, Steve?
This is a musical Batmobile. Specifically the Batmobile from Batman Forever.
And no other backstory to that whatsoever?
None. This was acquired at my wife's grandmother's house, consensually. This was taken with permission. I didn't just like rob.
You slept with her for it.
Is Grandma okay? Like, someone check on Grandma.
I mean, it was cleaning
Grandma,
up her house after she passed.
I'm not really into this, but
maybe hard to check in.
looks sweet. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Does wife know?
Oh yes, wife was there. Everybody was very
God.
No. So everybody was very sad, but I did not know the person who had passed, and I was brought as like emotional support. And so everybody else was being very sad, and I was like,
sorry,
can I
someone
have the
died?
Batmobile?
So you were brought as emotional support and just took something for yourself?
We were
Jesus.
cleaning up the house.
Okay,
I didn't know that there was
He just
a passing.
bootlicked it right out of there.
Right?
We also got a
Steve.
solar-powered waving queen figurine. So like,
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
You're bringing that next
Yeah.
week. Okay.
Exactly. I want the listeners to know, first of all, thanks for listening and watching. And I want you to know that even though we failed at recording this episode the first time, and a lot of material was brought up again in new and creative ways, we actually were a lot smarter this episode as well. We kind of burned through all the dumb points.
I benefited
the good
from I benefited from my goldfish-esque memory, and so this was all perfectly new to me.
It was all new, like,
Same.
honestly. Yeah. Yeah.
Same.
I already
Right.
forgot everything I said.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, so we've got the Batmobile. What do you have,
Okay.
Lisa, today?
I have lip gloss that I'm going to...
That's pretty good. And then Rachel, do you want to join in here with an instrument?
So I just grabbed this that was on my desk for aesthetic reasons.
What is it?
And I
It's
can.
just like, is it an
Oh.
objet?
I don't know. I bought it because I wanted to have a fancy desk.
Love
and
it.
It was cheap.
The Podcast is Broken Orchestra consists of a Batmobile and chapstick and an objet.
An objet.
He sounds so
Objet.
disappointed in us. Okay, let's
No. I think
Do
it's
you object to the objet?
No,
The
it's
objet
an
is
objet
lovely.
de art, and this is what it is. We're doing the art right now. This is great.
Okay, ready?
So thanks so much for listening and watching, and this is the theme. The Podcast is Broken. 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 Podcast a podcast is broken. Podcast a podcast is broken. Podcast is broken.
Woo! If we
Wow,
make
that was
if
really
we-
beautiful.
If we make it to the end of the year, we got to put out an EP of all those.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm going to
Right?
see if I can get Deadmau5 to remix a couple of them. That'd be cool.
You guys could win a Juno.
because
Listen,
There you go.
2024.
That sounded a little
you're
bad.
I could meet Nelly Furtado.
she's
I
like a
actually
bird,
would
never
like
you
to
forget
meet
it.
Nelly
That's right.
Furtado. Nelly
She-
Furtado.
Yeah,
She
Maneater's a
seems
top
really
tune.
cool.
Maneater's a top tune. All right, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next week. And Rachel's probably never coming back now, but she might.
She
You never know.
better.
We could
She
film another
better.
episode easily.
Maybe if
All
you
right.
guys pay me a buck or two.
Okay, we're
instead
done
of
for
the
we're time.
pennies.
Time's out now, Rachel. Sorry. Thanks. Bye.
Gotta go. See ya.